Let me begin with a question that should concern every American taxpayer, every NATO ally, and frankly, anyone who understands how empires collapse. What does it mean when the world's most powerful military admits it can no longer afford to be everywhere at once? This week, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth authorized the most significant restructuring of the U.S. military command architecture in nearly half a century. Not since the Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986 has the Pentagon contemplated changes of this magnitude. And, make no mistake, this is not administrative housekeeping. This is strategic retreat dressed up as efficiency reform. According to multiple sources familiar with the planning, the Pentagon is preparing to consolidate 11 combatant commands down to 8. U.S. Central Command, which oversees the Middle East. U.S. European Command, responsible for NATO operations. U.S. Africa Command, managing the entire continent. All three are set to merge into a single entity, tentatively called U.S. International Command. Let that sink in. The entire Middle East, all of Europe, and the African continent, regions that have consumed trillions of American dollars and thousands of American lives over the past 3 decades, are being downgraded to a single 4-star command. The message is unmistakable. Washington has concluded these regions are no longer worth the investment of top-tier military focus. The official justification is predictable. Too many generals. Too much bureaucracy. The United States military today maintains roughly the same number of 4-star flag officers as it did during World War II, despite having a significantly smaller force structure. Secretary Hegseth argues that streamlining command will accelerate decision-making and reduce redundancy. On paper, the logic is sound. In practice, this is about something far more fundamental: resource allocation in an era of strategic overstretch. The United States cannot simultaneously dominate Europe, control the Middle East, contain China in the Indo-Pacific, and manage hemispheric security in the Americas. For 20 years, Washington operated under the illusion that it could. That illusion is now colliding with reality. The restructuring reveals that hard choices are being made, and those choices prioritize the Indo-Pacific and the Western Hemisphere over Europe and the Middle East. This shift was not sudden. It has been building for years, visible to anyone watching force posture decisions, budget allocations, and strategic guidance documents. But this reorganization makes it official. The pivot to Asia, discussed theoretically since the Obama administration, is now being operationalized at the highest levels of military command. The implications are staggering. For European allies, this restructuring is a nightmare. For 3/4 of a century, the American security guarantee underpinned European stability. NATO's credibility rested on the assumption that the United States would respond decisively to any threat against alliance members. Maintaining a dedicated 4-star European command signaled that commitment. Downgrading EUCOM into a subdivision of a larger international command signals something very different. European defense ministers understand this. They see the writing on the wall. Germany's defense spending remains anemic despite years of promises. France talks endlessly about strategic autonomy, but lacks the capability to project meaningful power beyond its borders. The United Kingdom, post-Brexit and economically constrained, cannot fill the gap left by American disengagement. Eastern European states, particularly Poland and the Baltic nations, which have taken the Russian threat seriously and increased their own defense spending, now face the prospect of diminished American backup precisely when they need it most. The timing could not be worse for Europe. Russian military forces, despite heavy losses in Ukraine, are reconstituting. Moscow has learned painful lessons and is adapting. Russian defense production has ramped up significantly. Western sanctions, while economically damaging, have not crippled Russia's ability to sustain military operations. And now, as Europe watches American attention shift elsewhere, the Kremlin sees an opportunity. This is not speculation. Russian military planning documents and strategic communications make clear that Moscow views NATO cohesion as fragile. Any signal of American wavering is interpreted as an invitation to probe further. The consolidation of combatant commands will be read in Moscow as confirmation that Washington's priorities lie elsewhere. Whether that assessment is correct is almost irrelevant. Perception drives strategy, and Russia perceives weakness. The Middle East faces a different but equally profound transformation. For decades, U.S. Central Command represented the centerpiece of American power projection in the region. CENTCOM coordinated operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and across the Arabian Peninsula. It managed relationships with key partners like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, and Egypt. It served as the primary counterweight to Iranian influence. Folding CENTCOM into a broader international command reduces its bureaucratic weight and, inevitably, its operational priority. Regional partners will notice. When Abu Dhabi or Riyadh seeks high-level military engagement with Washington, they want direct access to a four-star combatant commander focused exclusively on their theater. Sharing that commander's attention with European and African issues dilutes the relationship. Iran will notice too. Tehran has spent years working to expel American military presence from the region. Every U.S. troop withdrawal, every base closure, every reduction in forward presence is celebrated as a strategic victory. The consolidation of CENTCOM signals that the United States is, in fact, deprioritizing the Middle East. That perception will embolden Iranian decision-making, not just in traditional spheres like Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, but potentially in more aggressive actions across the Gulf. Then there is Africa. U.S. Africa Command was established in 2007 amid concerns about terrorism, Chinese influence, and resource competition across the continent. AFRICOM never enjoyed the same priority as other commands operating out of Stuttgart, Germany, rather than on African soil. Now it is being absorbed entirely. This sends a clear message to African partners and adversaries alike. The United States is walking away. China has already filled much of this vacuum. Chinese infrastructure investment across Africa dwarfs American engagement. Chinese military facilities are expanding. Chinese arms sales are growing. Beijing does not need to dominate Africa militarily. It needs access, influence, and resources, all of which it is securing while Washington reorganizes its command structure and looks the other way. So, where is American military focus shifting? The answer is explicit in the restructuring plan, the Indo-Pacific and the Western Hemisphere. U.S. Indo-Pacific Command will retain its standalone status and likely receive enhanced resources. U.S. Southern Command and U.S. Northern Command, managing hemispheric security, remain intact and potentially elevated in importance. This is the real strategic calculation. China represents the only peer competitor capable of challenging American global dominance. The Indo-Pacific is where the next great power conflict will be decided, if it happens. Taiwan, the South China Sea, freedom of navigation, semiconductor supply chains. These are the issues that keep Pentagon planners awake at night. Not another insurgency in the Sahel, not another crisis in the Balkans. The Western Hemisphere receives renewed attention for different reasons. Mass migration, drug trafficking, transnational criminal organizations, and the growing influence of adversarial powers like China and Russia in Latin America all threaten U.S. interests closer to home. After 2 decades of costly expeditionary warfare in the Middle East, there is a recognition that securing the homeland and the immediate periphery must take precedence. This restructuring is not ideological. It is not driven by isolationism or a desire to abandon allies. It is driven by mathematics. The United States military budget, massive as it is at over $800 billion annually, is finite. Personnel are finite. Strategic attention is finite. Choices must be made about where to concentrate limited resources for maximum effect. But those choices carry consequences. Allies who believed American commitments were ironclad will recalibrate their own strategies. Some will increase their defense spending and pursue greater self-reliance. Others will hedge by improving relations with Russia or China. A few may pursue independent nuclear capabilities if they conclude the American security umbrella is no longer reliable. Adversaries will probe. They always do when they sense opportunity. Russia may test NATO's resolve in the Baltics or the Black Sea. Iran may escalate in the Gulf or accelerate its nuclear program. China may increase pressure on Taiwan or push harder in the South China Sea. The calculation is simple. If America is stretched thin and refocusing elsewhere, windows of opportunity open. There is another dimension to consider. This restructuring happens against the backdrop of domestic political polarization in the United States. Future administrations may reverse these decisions, restoring separate commands for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Such reversals would create whiplash in military planning and confuse allies and adversaries alike about American intentions. Strategic consistency requires sustained political will across multiple administrations. That is increasingly difficult to guarantee in the current American political environment. Hegseth and the Joint Chiefs will argue this reorganization enhances agility and readiness. Fewer layers of bureaucracy mean faster decision cycles. Streamlined command structures reduce duplication and improve efficiency. These arguments are not without merit. The U.S. military does suffer from bloated headquarters and excessive flag officer ranks. Reforms are overdue, but efficiency is not strategy, and this reorganization is fundamentally about strategy, not management. It is about making explicit what has been implicit for years. The United States cannot sustain global military dominance across every region simultaneously. Priorities must be set. Resources must be concentrated. Some commitments must be reduced or abandoned. The hard truth is this: American military power, while still unmatched, is no longer unlimited. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan consumed trillions of dollars and achieved ambiguous results at best. The defense industrial base has atrophied. Recruitment challenges persist. Weapons systems are increasingly expensive and procurement timelines stretch for decades. Meanwhile, China has used the past 20 years to modernize its military at an unprecedented pace while the United States was distracted in the Middle East. This restructuring is an acknowledgment of these realities. It represents a shift from global hegemony to selective engagement, from universal presence to prioritized commitment, from reflexive intervention to calculated restraint. These are necessary adjustments. The question is whether they come too late or go far enough. For NATO allies, the lesson should be clear. The era of relying almost entirely on American military power to guarantee European security is ending. Europe must take responsibility for its own defense. That means not just meeting the 2% of GDP defense spending target, which many members still fail to achieve, but fundamentally rethinking European military capabilities, industrial capacity, and strategic autonomy. For Middle Eastern partners, the message is equally stark. American security guarantees will be more conditional and less automatic. Regional states must either develop stronger indigenous defense capabilities or accept greater accommodation with rising powers like Iran. The days of assuming American forces will always be positioned to intervene are over. For adversaries, this restructuring offers opportunities but also risks. Yes, American attention is divided. Yes, resources are being reallocated, but pushing too hard could trigger exactly the kind of focused American response that no adversary wants. The United States retains overwhelming military capabilities when it chooses to employ them. The restructuring does not eliminate that power. It simply makes clear that it will not be employed everywhere, all the time, for every contingency. The broader historical pattern is unmistakable. Empires do not collapse overnight. They overextend, exhaust their resources, face rising challengers, and gradually retreat from peripheral commitments to defend core interests. The Roman Empire withdrew from Britain and Dacia before the fall of Rome. The British Empire relinquished India and Africa before losing global dominance. The Soviet Union pulled back from Eastern Europe before dissolution. The United States is not collapsing, but it is adjusting to a world where its relative power has diminished and where other actors, particularly China, are ascending. This Pentagon restructuring is one visible manifestation of that adjustment. It will not be the last. Future force posture reviews, base closures, alliance reassessments, and strategic guidance documents will continue this trend. The next few years will test whether this reorientation succeeds or accelerates American decline. If the Indo-Pacific focus enables successful deterrence of Chinese aggression and preservation of the rules-based order in that critical region, the restructuring will be judged a success. If, however, Europe fractures, the Middle East descends into greater chaos, and China still achieves its objectives in Asia, historians will view this as a failed attempt to manage inevitable decline. Military strategy is about choices. The Pentagon has made its choice. Europe and the Middle East are no longer the primary focus. The Indo-Pacific is. Whether that choice proves wise depends on events that have not yet unfolded. What is certain is that the world order Americans have known for 75 years is changing fundamentally. This restructuring is not the cause of that change. It is a symptom, and symptoms, if read correctly, reveal the deeper condition of the patient. The question every citizen, every ally, and every adversary should be asking is not whether the United States is retrenching. It clearly is. The question is what comes next in a world where American power is more selective, more focused, and ultimately more limited than at any point since the end of the Cold War. The answer to that question will shape the 21st century.